All right, welcome everyone to the private well care before and after storms webinar. My name is Yiling Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent in UF IFAS Extension Central District. I'm based in Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka. So is this the first time you attend this webinar? Could you let me know your answer in the Q&A function? Just have a sense if you know extension. Because this is usually the first slide I have for all my webinars. If you haven't heard of extension, you may wonder what is extension. So I usually say the best way to describe extension is we are the extension of University of Florida. We extend the university-based, research-based knowledge to the public because we know it's the information era. When you have the smartphone, you basically have the whole world in your hand. But the question is the information reliable? Can you trust the information? So that's where comes extension. What we say here is not our opinion. It's all science-based. And like I mentioned, I'm based in Mid-Florida Research Education Center in Apopka, and I cover the whole Central District. So for UF-IFAS extension, it's divided in 5 districts, and the Central District is the orange area. It's not just Central Florida. It's quite interesting. You look at the map, it covers the Central Florida and the North Central Florida, 11 counties. There are 11 counties in my district. So like I asked at the beginning, it's if you have attended the UF-IFAS extension programs, and if you have attended our webinar before. So if you have attended our extension programs, you already know what extension is, and you know what we do. And if you have attended the webinar, so you know it's part of the Florida Well Owner Network. So what is the Florida Well Owner Network, which I forgot to put on this slide. It's recently we just had our logo, which I really like. So in the last webinar, I put our logo here, and this one I forgot. When I have chance, I will show the logo to everyone. So like I said, while we do the Florida Well Owner Network, there are 3 goals. One is to educate residents about the well water quality and quantity, and the best practices to ensure well maintenance and groundwater, and also to facilitate access to well water testing and provide information about treatment options if problems are found. The last fold for us, we would like to complement efforts by Florida Department of Health and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to increase awareness among Floridians about practices regarding wells, septic systems, and drinking water quality. And why did we develop this Florida Well Owner Network program? It's based uniquely on Florida situation. Just let's have a quick look at wells in Florida. Because when people move to Florida, first they hear Florida, what they think of, it's the beaches and it's the metropolitan area. But if we look into the statistics, there are about 2.5 Floridians rely on private wells for home assumptions, for home consumptions. So that's about 12% of the total population in Florida. And different from public water supplies, private wells are not regulated. So in other words, private well users control the management and the protection of their wells. For Florida Department of Health, they preview the management of private wells, and they also provide information to well users. Again, they do not require or regulate private regular well water testing. There's one program under the Florida Department of Health. It's called the Well Surveillance Program. So they do monitor some wells, but these are the wells under the areas known or suspect for contaminants. Again, it's not for regular water testing. That's why there is a very limited public data on how many well users regularly test their water or drink from contaminated wells. On the other side, for Florida, it's a typical Florida home with a well. You also have a septic system. So similar statistic to wells. More than 2.5 million septic systems are in use across the state of Florida. So nearly 1 in every 3 households in Florida depends on septic systems. And on top of that, it's private wells do not have regulations regarding the maintenance, like regular testing. Septic system, on the other hand, there's the basin management action plans, because this action plans, we call it the BMAPs, identify septic systems as a major source of nitrogen to impair water bodies. That's why there's a series of actions to address septic system issues. So which I briefly mentioned in last webinar. So that's the 2022 private well and the septic system webinar series, where I already did the first 2, private well 101 and the septic system well 101. After this webinar, I will share the PowerPoint slides with you and also link to the recording. If you missed the last 2 webinars, you can find the recording, the links to the recordings in this presentation. And this one is private well care before and after storms. Next month, it will be the septic system care before and after storms. So what will be covered in this this short presentation, I will cover the major impacts of hurricanes and how do they impact private wells, and how to prepare emergency water supplies, and what should you do if your well is flooded. And if your well is flooded and you test it, what should you do if your well water testing result reveals the bacterial contamination? So here first is the hurricane season, because living in Florida, one thing we cannot avoid is the heavy storms. And on top of that is we have hurricane season. Atlantic hurricane season starts at June 1st and ends at November 30th. So we're about to enter the hurricane season. I find that this article said that the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season is predicted to be another above average hurricane season by scientists at Colorado State University. So what are the major impacts of hurricanes? So that actually, I'm just a little bit curious here. It's have you lived in Florida over a year? Or in other words, have you been through a hurricane season in Florida? If so, please put in the chat box. Let me see. And while you are typing, oh, I see answer. It's a yes, you've already been through some hurricane season, so you are all familiar with hurricane. So I categorized it into 3 categories. So the impacts of hurricanes from the wind, from the power outage, and excessive rain and flooding. So that's the 3 categories we get prepared for our private wells. So first is wind. Hurricanes bring the high-speed wind, and high winds can carry large debris that could loosen the well hardware, dislodge well construction materials, or distort casing. So to prepare for that part is secure, like anything else, like what you can control, the large pieces outside, make sure it's secure. And before hurricane, it's also a regular maintenance, making sure the well cap is secure and everything to your well construction is sound. And the next, the biggest impact for hurricane is power outage. So keep in mind, well pump will not work when power goes out. So if you lose power, make sure that you turn off your pump at the circuit breaker and leave it off during the storm. And also very important, it's keep sufficient potable water on hand for drinking and cooking. So the question is, how much water do we need? So generally speaking, one person is 1.5 gallons per day. But usually it's before hurricane season, we should see the news. It's just so hard to get water. So like either it's limited to a certain amount of water you can get, or the grocery stores are out of water. So if that happens, you cannot purchase your emergency water supplies. You can also prepare your emergency water supplies. So here just gave you a quick outline how you can prepare your emergency water supplies. So first, like I mentioned, how much water is sufficient. Rule of thumb, 1 to 1.5 gallons per day per person. And you increase the amount stored if there are children, sick people, or nursing moms in the house. And then you have pets, you store about a quart to a gallon per pet per day, depends on their size. Minimum the water supply, we suggest 3 days. But I've seen I haven't been through a hurricane, like out of power outage more than a day, but several of my friends, they are out of power for over a week. So that's 3 days, we say it's minimum. If you can, it doesn't hurt to prepare like a week-long water supply. And if you have space for it, you can consider storing a 2-week water supply. And the reason I said if you have space for that, later I will show you the math and you will know how much water is that. So just if it's a family of 4 and it's 1.5 gallons of water per person per day, and here my math is only the minimum 3 days. So for 3 days for a family of 4, it requires 18 gallons of water. And if you have pets, like you have dogs, that it can increase to 24 gallons of water. So you just imagine you have this 1 gallon jug and it's 18 gallons. So sometimes it's hard to stack up. So it can take quite a bit of space for that. That's 3 days for a family of 4, 18 gallons. And you double it to 6 days, that's 36 gallons. It is a lot of water, but that's also the water we need for the time being. So if you can, like I mentioned, always do the most conservative preparation. So like you have space considering a 2-week supply of water. And if we go back to power outage, so just again, it's a reminder, most well pumps operate on a 240 volt circuit. Because for our household water, household energy, it's 110, and for your pump power, it's 240. So there's a little bit difference here. So if you plan to use a generator to run your well pump during a power outage, please have the connections established by a licensed electrician. So last Hurricane Michael, it hit Florida Panhandle, and a little bit different from other hurricanes. That one wasn't a fast past hurricane, so it was very slow. So it didn't cause flooding, but the wind caused the power outage. And the power outage lasted, some areas last more than 2 weeks. So some well owners was trying to connect a generator to their pump, but the voltage and also other considerations. Fortunately, I didn't hear any accidents for that, but really bad accidents can happen when you don't connect the generator correctly. So if you want to do that, hire a licensed electrician to do that. Because and some other complication to that, it's if the well was flooded or underwater, then it has to some other things to consider. First, do not turn on any equipment until the wiring system has been dried out and checked by a qualified electrician, because we know water and electricity are very dangerous together. And also, if the well, like the pump control box, was submerged or damaged during flooding, or even just the wind damage, it was hit by debris, you want to check all the components, also making sure the electrical components are completely dry before the electrical service is restored. And more like tips in regards to power outage. So all pumps and their electrical components can be damaged by sediment and flood water. So the pump will need to be cleaned of silt and sand. If pumps are not cleaned or properly lubricated, they can burn out. So that's another thing. It's not just to keep it dry, because with the flood water, it has the sediment. Clean that to prevent any further issues with your well pump. Get assistance from a well or pump contractor who will be able to clean and repair different types of pumps. And the last impact is a very common impact associated with the private wells is flooding, is the excessive rain and flooding. So flooding places your private well in danger of contamination from pollutants found in floodwaters and especially at risk of bacterial contamination. So we consider when it's like your well is in danger, it's the wellhead was surrounded by flood waters, or your wellhead was submerged in flood waters. And sometimes you may not know if your wellhead was flooded or not, or the flood water already receded. You didn't even know if it was surrounded by flood water. So you may not notice the flooding situation, but you may notice a change of the color or odor in your well after a storm event. Then what should you do if your well is flooded? Test your water. That's the only way to know if your well water is contaminated or not. So just based on looking at it, even a change of odor and color, sometimes it can be harmless constituents in your water. So just based on looking at it, smelling at it, it doesn't tell you if your well water is contaminated or not. Test it is the only way to know. And we suggest you get your well water tested by a state certified lab. So at the end of the slide, I have a link to the state certified slide. And I will also touch a little on that. Before you receive your test result, be sure to use alternative for safe water sources. Could be the emergency water supply you prepared, or can be like the bottled water you purchase from the grocery store. And you use that water, keep in mind, not just for drinking, also for like brushing your teeth, washing dishes, or washing areas of skins have been cut or injured. So in other words, any way you may ingest it, you may ingest that water, you want to make sure that water is clean. So what should you have your well tested? Because I mentioned if your well is flooded, it can be contaminated by what's in the flood water. So here are the EPA drinking water standard. Even though private wells are not regulated, we still suggest to follow these EPA Drinking Water Act. And these two standards apply for public water supplies. In other words, public utilities regularly monitor these two types of parameters and making sure they meet the standards. So one type is called a primary, another type of secondary. Primary drinking water standards are these contaminants have cause health problems, and the secondary standards are these water constituents. They don't cause health impact. but they cause they may sting, they may taste a little bit funny, or they have odor. So it's just more like a cosmetic perspective. So we say what to test. These are the two big categories you want to test, and these are also the two categories for the regular well maintenance. However, there are like over 100 parameters in it. So as a private well owner, even for utilities, they don't test all the 100 parameters every day. They also keep on different frequency. So we look at this potential contaminants for private wells. I briefly mentioned that in the private 101 webinar. So the potential contaminants for private wells are in like can be two categories, two bigger categories. One is inside your house, another is outside your house. So inside your house, it's your plumbing. That kind of heavy metals can leach into your water. But outside your house, it's if your well casing is correct. So like the flood water, whatever contaminants in the flood water, whatever contaminants in the soil can all get into your well. And also another big category of potential contaminants is determined by if it's natural occurring or it's human activities, because some contaminants are natural occurring, usually really deep. Some areas natural occurring exists arsenic, but a lot of contaminants for private well, potential contaminants to private wells based on human activities, like septic systems, like fertilizers. So these are the potential contaminants of a private wells. And in the private well 101, I mentioned the basic water testing parameters, just want to as a reminder. So this you want to keep it tested every year, bacteria, nitrate, and the lead. So after flooding event, if you have the capacity, we suggest you also test these basic parameters. However, this I already mentioned, I just put it there as a recap, because minimum testing bacteria, it can the source can be animal waste, can be the septic systems, and can be the flood water. And the nitrate, we know it's from fertilizers, also from septic systems. And the high nitrate concentration can be particularly dangerous for babies under 6 months old, since the nitrate interferes with the ability of blood to carry oxygen. And for lead, it's inside the usually it's caused by the plumbing, by the pumps, and by the pipes, and also the pumps, especially when the situation is the pH is low, and it will cause, because then the water is corrosive. If your house has any parts already with lead, it can increase the concentration of lead leaching to your water. So that's another as the basic parameters, like I mentioned. If you have the capacity, will also be good to test it after the flooding event. But if you don't have the capacity to do that, one thing we highly suggest to test after flood is bacteria. Here's the data shows after Irma, you can it gives you a snapshot of the bacteria contaminations in different counties in the states. This data, it's a little bit, because this is the first attempt to do a statewide private well sampling. And for the basic parameters, it's not for like areas we know it has a certain pesticide, or the areas we know it has arsenic. This is just for the regular routine test. That's our first attempt, because we don't have a good baseline data. So we cannot really compare. This is after Irma. This is, this is after hurricane, and this is before hurricane. So we can do a comparison. So we don't really have that much data to show. One pilot study I did in Marion County, here you can see, after hurricane, the bacteria total coliform contamination is 26%. And after a 2-year regular water testing without the flooding event, the bacteria, the baseline bacteria contamination is at 18%. So we do see it's the increase of bacteria contamination after flooding event. So if you can only test one water parameter, we suggest you test the bacteria. And where can you have your water tested? Like I mentioned, a state certified lab. So you can search, it's a house that I think now it's a house in both DOH and the DEP. So if you search for the state certified water labs, all the link I provided later, so it will direct you to the a list of certified labs. You can search by location, or you can search by parameters, so what you want to test. The other question I got a lot, it's do I have to use certified labs? Can I use any testing kits to do that? So that's the little experiment I did. It wasn't very extensive. I find that these two very highly rated drinking water testing kits online. So the reviews were great, over 10,000 reviews. So I got these testing kits because my question is the same. Can we use these testing kits? So I compared the results from these testing kits to a certified lab. So, but the bottom line is these testing kits are not sensitive enough, or they cannot accurately, they don't have the sensitivity level to accurately reflect the primary drinking water standards. In other words, all these contaminants cause health impact. You use those testing kits, they will not tell you when it's at a low dose. When they tell you it's already high concentration, for example, bacteria here, the drinking water standard requires as long as you bacteria is present, that's a failure sample. You are not supposed to drink it. But for the testing kits, it's 10 units. So you can see to trigger that, it has to have a much higher concentration of these contaminants. So that's why we say for the primary drinking water standards, these testing kits are not sensitive enough, but for the secondary drinking water standards, like harness, it's not that accurate, but it can it's not like lab gave you exact calcium concentration, but it's also in a good range. It can tell you if your water is hard, or it's not hard, or it's slightly hard or moderate hard. So I will say for the secondary drinking water standards, it's all right. You can use it as a try, but as the primary drinking water standards, still use a certified lab to have your water tested. So I provided this checklist in the private well 101. I still want to put it here as a reminder. The reason for that is when you send your sample to a private well, a private lab to have it tested, or I said private lab, the commercial, like these certified labs, they're still commercial labs and they're still private labs. That's another note I would like to give to everyone. It's they may charge different prices. So you can call different labs to find the price. Again, some health department, they may still provide the testing. So I will suggest to contact your local health department first. If they don't provide that, you probably can also get a list of certified labs from your local health department. If they don't have that, then the whole list of the state certified labs can also be a reference. Because when you send the samples to a certified lab, they will ask you, what do you want to test? There is nothing, like there's no comprehensive water testing. You just collect a tube of water and it will spit out all the contaminants. That will be so ideal, but at this point, the certified labs, they cannot do it because different chemical different contaminant, they run different process. So the SOPs are different, and the sampling bottles are also different. So knowing what you want to test is very important when you send your sample to the private labs. So here gave you a quick reference from the visible, could be like calcium, could be dirt, could be iron. Like I mentioned, I will share this PowerPoint slide with you. And if you want a more detailed info, please watch the recording of the private well 101. It covers all the basics of private wells. And excuse me. And also the second checklist part is from the taste, because after flooding, sometimes people tend to have noticed the change of taste. Could be the taste of high sodium or iron content, or even like especially if your well casing is cracked or well cap is cracked or missing. So at the downstream or downslope, you may also get some chemical taste. Could be from industrial chemicals or pesticide. And for the smell part, could be hydrogen sulfide, or could be if you have some detergent smell, or might be a failing septic systems. Again, if you, especially for the fuel, it's a downslope and you know you have very old well, you haven't checked the structure, because there could be also some gasoline smell in your well water. So it's just a quick checklist. Again, we don't know if your drinking water has this contaminant or not until you test it. So when you collect the water sample and send it to the lab and waiting for your results, still as a reminder, be sure to use alternative safe water sources. And if you run out of your emergency water supplies, you can boil your water, but also keep in mind boiling water is only effective for bacterial contamination. So if you have lead or nitrate in your drinking water, boiling it will only concentrate these contaminants. It will not remove these contaminants. So what should you do if your well water testing reveals bacterial contamination? So if the results comes back, it's positive, it shows bacterial contamination, then your well and your well system must be disinfected. You also need to flush out all the household plumbing, including the water heater. And if you have any treatment systems or devices, remove, like especially you have reverse osmosis or you have carbon filters, remove all the membranes, cartridges, and the filters, replace them after disinfection process is completed. And when you disinfect your well, you use non-scented household bleach. So if you look at the label, it's about 5 to 6% sodium hypochlorite. And do not use splashless bleach, simply because the sodium hypochlorite concentration is not high. And also they tend to create these studs. So it's hard to flush it out. That's why we suggest the non-scented household bleach. At the sodium hypochlorite concentration, it's around the 6%. And also check sell by date for this chlorine bleach. Because if you have a bleach bottle you already opened, and you probably do not want to use that bottle to disinfect your well, because once it's opened, the effectiveness of chlorine decrease over time. So and also if this bottle is unopened and is sitting on your shelf, then check the sell by date, making sure it hasn't expired, because you want to use effective chlorine bleach to disinfect your well. And also another, if you can get these pH testing strips, making sure the pH is between 6.5 and 7, because when it's too high or too low, it will either way will affect the effectiveness of shock chlorination process. And I said that the whole process is called shock chlorination disinfection. The reason the name for that, we use excessive chlorine. So that's not a regular disinfection method. And to do shock chlorination, you first pump out the well to remove any potential contaminants. So if you know the volume of your well, then you pump at least 3 well volumes of water from the faucet near the wellhead. If you don't know the volume, then at least run the water, just flush the flush the well for about an hour. And an hour, that's a lot of water. If possible, collect this water and use for later. You can use it to water your garden and water your yard. And when you flush the system, do not forget also the household plumbing. So in other words, turn on all the faucet also inside the house and also flush out the water heater. Because when we flush out the system, we tend to forget the water heater. And after you flush out the potential contaminants, then turn off the electrical power to the pump and remove the well cap. Prepare a solution of bleach and water and pour the solution into the top of the well. So if you are not comfortable with this process, you can hire a well contract to do that. And when you hire a well contract to do that, I suggest you being present. Because the last time one well owner told me he hired a well contractor to do that, but that well contractor didn't use a solution of bleach. He just poured a whole gallon of bleach into the wellhead, which the concentration of bleach is just too much. It can damage the well. It can also damage the pump. So the critical step here is you prepare a solution of bleach and water, and the ratio is 10 parts of water with 1 part of bleach. So you can see it's not that much. The pure bleach, the fume can also be toxic, and the high chlorine concentration can damage the plumbing system. So how much bleach is needed, then it really depends. It depends on how deep your well is and how wide your well is. So here gave you a very rough reference. So if your well is 2-inch well, typically a residential well is a 2-inch well, and an agricultural well, typically it's 4-inch well. Some might be 6-inch. So know the diameter of your well and also know the depth of your well. If you don't have the info, sometimes you can find it on the wellhead. So they put a metal part on the well with the info, like they put SWL, and I believe it's surface water level. So means like where the casing, your well hit the water table. So some info probably you can find it on your wellhead. They may not put like everything in their full name, maybe just use acronym. So if you cannot find that the info on your wellhead, you can also contact your local health department because they are the permitting agency. They have that kind of info. It really depends because some local county agents because all the info is online, they give you the access, ask you to go online to find it. It can be very quick, and sometimes it can be paper record. It may take a while. So if you cannot find the info, do the best guess you can. Like I mentioned, the typical residential well is 2-inch, probably 100 feet in Central Florida. Typical agricultural well, it's 4-inch well and about 200 feet in Central Florida. But still, that's like a very, very rough estimation because your well could be only 50 feet. So the reference I gave you is just really rough estimate if you cannot find it. And if we look at example, 2-inch well, 100 feet deep, then you only need 1 cup of bleach. So can you imagine that residential well and the contractor just pour a whole gallon of bleach into it. And as a matter of fact, you only need 1 cup of bleach and mix with 10 cups of water. And once you pour the solution into your well, you start to recirculate the water by connecting a hose to a faucet and spraying the water back into the well for at least 10 minutes. Then you go inside to your house, open every faucet in the system, let the water run until you smell the chlorine. So in that way, you get all the plumbing, all the pipes disinfected. After this process, you close all the faucets and seal the top of the well. So you want to keep this chlorinated well in the system for at least 12 hours, but no more than 24 hours. So I would say usually a good time for that, it's you do that like at night, like in the afternoon, and the next day morning, you can flush the whole system. So when the next day when you flush the whole system, it's similar. You operate the pump by turning on all the faucets, beginning with outside, flush out all the water until there's no chlorine odor. So then after that, you finish the short chlorination disinfection process. Are you done there? You are not done yet. And the next step is the critical step is because the only way to know if you still have bacteria or not is to test it. You do not want to test it right away because right away you just disinfect the whole system. So even it shows you it's clear, it might be the residual chlorine kill all the bacteria. It's just not a very accurate reflection of your well water quality. So we suggest wait for about 5 to 10 days to get your water tested. If you still have bacteria, you may need to repeat the process again to remove some long-established bacterial colonies. And if you do that process again, you get it tested, you still have bacterial contamination, then you need to contract a water treatment professional familiar with bacterial contamination. Or probably you can also hire a well contractor to have a look at your well, see if it's the well casing is correct, like something is about the well structure, because our groundwater is not supposed to have a bacteria. Could also be your well is too shallow, so it doesn't get the water from the aquifer. So because when it's shallow, any land use activities can affect the well water simply. So that's another solution you want to do besides hire a professional to have water treatment system. And another factor or risk related to flooding is your septic systems, because flooding can stress to your septic tank. And if your septic tank is already stressed and you are still using water, then the water can back out. And again, with your well being shallow, it increased the risks of other contaminants like fecal coliform bacteria, nitrate, and other contaminants. So when you know your area, like after flooding, do not use septic system until your drain field is dry or water in the drain field is lower than the water level around the house. If sewage back up into the house, clean the area and disinfect the floor. And when you disinfect, you still use the household non-scented chlorine bleach. Here it just gave you a reference. You can also look at the label behind the bleach. Generally, it's 1 gallon of water mixed with ½ cup of chlorine. You can use that solution to disinfect area. So here just gave you very quick snapshot of septic systems, because the next month we will dive into more of the septic system care before and after storms. And this is the link to the registration. And here are some additional resources. You can find the first link is the certified labs. Everything I outlined earlier, how to shock chlorinated your well. You can also find this extension publication. It gave you more detailed information. And another one is a UFI for septic system webpage. So with that, I will be happy to take any questions that you have. So it may take you some time to type the question. So if you are typing your question, could you raise up your hand? Just let me know you are typing. I don't see any hand up. Is that safe to say I cover all the questions you have? All right, I don't see any questions here, but you have my contact info here. If you have any more questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. And if you live in the Florida Panhandle, my counterpart, Dr. Andrea Appleton, she will be a good resource because I'm more familiar with the situation in Central Florida, and she's more familiar with the Florida Panhandle. So we both we partner together and develop this Florida well owner network. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. With that, thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Bye now.